There's a stretch of the open Pacific, thousands of miles from the nearest coastline, where the strongest storms on Earth are not supposed to be born. It sits too far east. Out there, the ocean is supposed to run out of heat before a young storm can run out of room to grow. For 58 years, the record for the farthest east spot a Category 5 super typhoon had ever ignited belonged to a storm from 1968. This week, that record fell. A system named Dolphin exploded to Category 5 strength farther east than any tropical cyclone ever measured in that basin, over a patch of sea sitting near 31 degrees Celsius, about 87 degrees Fahrenheit. That's warmer than most summer swimming pools, and it wasn't a small warm spot. It was an unbroken lane of hot water reaching all the way back to the international dateline, closer to Hawaii's longitude than to the coast of Asia. And Dolphin walked right down that lane and became a monster. If you're watching this from the United States, here's why it lands on your radar, and why I'm going to keep you here for the next 20 minutes. Part of America is sitting in this storm's neighborhood right now. A tiny sliver of United States territory is about to get a close pass from one of the most powerful storms on the planet this year. Two of the country's Pacific islands, already battered this season, are bracing for what a near miss still throws at them. And the same warm water that built Dolphin is loading the rest of this season, like almost nothing forecasters have seen in decades. I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, what's confirmed, what's being hyped, and what really comes next. If tracking real storms with the drama up front and the honesty inside is why you're here, subscribe now, because this season is only getting started and I'll be following every system as it forms. Let's start with what we know for certain, because the timeline on this one is almost hard to believe. The storm that would become Dolphin was just a cluster of thunderstorms near the dateline at the start of the week. It was named as a tropical storm on Monday. By Tuesday, it was a full typhoon. By Wednesday, it had punched through Category 4 strength, and within about a day and a half of that, it had crossed the line into super typhoon territory, which forecasters set at 150-mile-an-hour winds and up. Go back and sit with that pace for a second. From a loose swirl of clouds to a Category 5 equivalent in roughly 3 days, that kind of rapid intensification is the single most dangerous thing a tropical system can do, and it's worth understanding why, because it's the heart of what makes Dolphin frightening. A typhoon is a heat engine, and its only fuel is warm ocean water. Warm water evaporates into the storm, rises, and as that water vapor climbs and cools, it releases the heat it was carrying, which warms the core, drops the pressure at the center, and pulls the winds in faster. Faster winds churn up more warm water, which evaporates more, which releases more heat, which drops the pressure further, which speeds the winds again. Once that loop gets going over water this hot with nothing to interrupt it, a storm can wind itself up like a spinning skater pulling her arms in, and the numbers on the forecast screen can leap between one advisory and the next faster than any evacuation could ever move. When forecasters see rapid intensification setting up, they don't relax. They get nervous because the storm is now writing the story faster than they can read it. And the forecasters saw it coming, which is its own kind of unsettling. Late last Sunday night, before Dolphin was anything more than a fresh tropical storm, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center put out what one meteorologist described as an unusually aggressive forecast, calling for the storm to hit Category 5 by the end of the week. That is not the kind of call forecasters make lightly. Predicting a top-end storm days out from a system that was barely organized takes a level of confidence they only reach when the ocean underneath is so warm and the winds aloft so calm that they can practically see the outcome written in the water. They were right. When you watch it now on satellite, Dolphin has the look that makes even veteran forecasters go quiet. A clean, circular eye punched through the center of a vast pinwheel of cloud, the signature of a storm operating at the ceiling of what our atmosphere can build. As of the latest advisories, Dolphin is spinning a couple hundred miles south-southwest of Wake Island, crawling toward the west-northwest at around 12 miles an hour. Its sustained winds have been running near 160 miles an hour, and the United States Joint Typhoon Warning Center, the Navy and Air Force team in Hawaii that tracks these storms, has Dolphin still climbing, with a forecast peak somewhere near 180 miles an hour by Friday evening, maybe sooner. Gusts at that peak would push past 200 miles an hour. Let me put 180 miles an hour into terms you can feel, because the number alone goes numb after a while. Wind doesn't hit harder in a straight line as it speeds up, it hits harder on a curve. The force it carries climbs with the square of its speed, which means a 180 mile an hour wind isn't twice as punishing as a 90 mile an hour wind. It's 4 times as punishing. That's the kind of wind that doesn't just peel a roof off. It lifts a loaded shipping container, drives a snap 2x4 through a concrete wall, and turns the air itself into a wall of debris, moving faster than a car on the interstate. Forecasters compared Dolphin's peak to the wind you'd find inside a violent tornado, except a tornado passes over your house in seconds, and this is a storm the size of a small country, carrying that wind for hours. Now, before this turns into pure alarm, here's a piece of honesty you're not going to get from a lot of the panic accounts you'll see this week. Those wind numbers depend on how you measure them. The American Center clocks a storm's winds as a 1-minute average, and by that yardstick, Dolphin is a Category 5. Japan's meteorological agency, which is the official authority for this part of the world, measures winds as a 10-minute average, which almost always gives you a lower headline number for the exact same storm. By their scale, Dolphin is rated a notch down, as a severe typhoon rather than a super typhoon. Neither one is wrong. They're just holding 2 different rulers up to the same wind. So when you see one source screaming super typhoon and another calling it severe, that's the reason, and now you can read straight past the confusion. There's one more twist in the measurements worth knowing, because you'll see it play out over the next couple of days. Dolphin keeps going through what forecasters call eye wall replacement cycles. The storm's inner ring of thunderstorms, the eye wall, gets choked out by a new ring forming around it, and while that swap happens, the winds briefly level off or even dip before the fresh eye wall contracts and the storm ramps right back up. Dolphin's already done this more than once. That's why its intensity is plateaued and surged in a stair-step pattern instead of a smooth climb. So if you check in and see the winds flatten out for a few hours, don't read that as the storm giving up. 9 times out of 10, over water this warm, that's the storm reloading. Here's the part that makes Dolphin unusual though, and it's not the wind speed at all, it's the address. Dolphin reached Category 5 strength at a longitude of 166.5 degrees east. The old record for the easternmost birthplace of a Category 5 in the Northwest Pacific was set by Super Typhoon Faye back in 1968 at about 162.5 degrees east. That gap might sound small when you say it out loud, but it means the easternmost point a top-end storm has ever powered up in that entire ocean basin just shifted by a few hundred miles for the first time in nearly 6 decades. And I'll be honest with you, that's the detail that stopped me when I read it. Wind records get broken all the time. A record about where a monster is even physically capable of forming, one that had stood since the year humans first orbited the moon, is a different kind of thing. Storms this strong almost always need the long runway of warm water you find closer to Asia to reach full strength. Dolphin didn't wait for the runway. It found everything it needed way out in the open ocean, in a place the record book said shouldn't have enough fuel to do it. So why was the fuel sitting out there? One word, and it's the word running under this entire season: El Nino. During a strong El Nino, the enormous pool of warm water that normally piles up in the far western Pacific slides eastward, spreading warmth across a vast stretch of open ocean toward the dateline. Picture the sea rolling out a red carpet of hot water for storms to march down farther east than they'd usually get to lay one. Sea surface temperatures under Dolphin have been running near 30.8 degrees Celsius, more than a full degree above the average for this stretch of ocean in July, with pockets pushing close to 32. A single degree sounds like nothing until you remember that ocean heat is the only fuel these storms have. Warm the water 1 degree across an area the size of several states, and you've quietly handed every passing system a bigger tank of gas. That warm carpet reaching all the way to the dateline is precisely why Dolphin could be born so far east and still grow into a giant. Forecasters even noted that the disturbance which spawned it started near the date line, which is a classic fingerprint of a strong El Nino when the warm water stretches abnormally far across the Pacific. And Dolphin is not alone this year, not even close, and this is where the single storm becomes a much bigger story. Dolphin is the fourth super typhoon to spin up in the western Pacific this season, following Sinlaku in April, Mekala, and Bavi in early July. This July alone produced two separate Category 5 super typhoons, something that hadn't happened in a single July since 2014, and only the third July in the entire modern record to do it. Now widen the lens to the whole planet. Dolphin is the fifth Category 5 tropical cyclone anywhere on Earth so far this year, which puts 2026 ahead of the pace of 1997, the all-time record year for these top-end storms, when a dozen of them formed across the globe. Let that reframe the whole picture. The headline isn't only that Dolphin is strong, it's that this ocean keeps assembling storms like Dolphin, one after another, and the warm water is quietly telling us why. When people ask whether these storms are somehow connected to each other, the honest answer is that they're not linked like dominoes, one knocking over the next. They're independent storms, but they are drinking from the same overfilled well. Same warm ocean, same El Nino pattern, same loaded season. That's not a conspiracy. It's a setup, and the setup is measurable. And Dolphin hasn't even had the ocean to itself. At the very moment it was maxing out west of the date line, the eastern side of the Pacific was throwing its own punches. Off the coast of Mexico, Hurricane Genevieve spun up into the season's first Category 5 hurricane, with winds around 160 miles an hour before starting to unwind over cooler water. Closer to home, Tropical Storm Fausto tracked just north of the Hawaiian Islands, held in check only because the water up there was a touch too cool to let it explode the way Dolphin did. Stop and picture that map for a second. One ocean, and at nearly the same time it was running a Category 5 hurricane near Mexico, a system brushing past Hawaii, and a record-setting super typhoon out by the dateline. That is not a normal week of weather. That is an ocean with the throttle wide open, and El Nino's fingerprints are on every bit of it. Now let's talk about where Dolphin is going, because this is where the scary picture and the honest picture pull apart, and you deserve both of them. The piece of America closest to this storm is Wake Island. If you've never heard of it, you're in good company. It's a speck of United States territory in the middle of the Pacific, an atoll barely lifted above the waves, home to a remote airfield and a small handful of personnel. It has no towns, no real population to evacuate, just a runway that has mattered to the American military for the better part of a century and a strip of coral that the ocean could wash over on a bad day. Dolphin is passing within a couple hundred miles of it, close enough that United States facilities across the Pacific have already stepped up their tropical cyclone readiness posture. Wake gets the rough seas, the swell, the outer bands whipping across that low ground. The core of the storm, the deadly eye wall, is forecast to stay just off to one side. For a place that small and that flat, even a near miss is a serious event. And the people out there are watching this one with the kind of attention you can only understand if your entire world is a few feet above sea level with a hurricane close by. But here's the thing, a lot of the loudest posts this week are getting wrong, so let me be as clear as I can. Dolphin is not bearing down on Guam. It is not aiming at the Northern Mariana Islands. The latest forecasts have held steady on this point for days now. The storm is tracking well to the east and north of those islands and moving away from them, not toward them. And that matters enormously, because those two United States territories have already been through the ringer this year. Back in April, Super Typhoon Sinlaku slammed the Northern Marianas, its huge eye so wide it passed directly over both Tinian and Saipan at the same moment, an image that tells you everything about that storm's size. It killed 17 people, knocked out power to around 43,000 across the islands, and did somewhere near $1.5 billion in damage. And Sinlaku wasn't a freak. It was, by one count, the 10th Category 4 or 5 tropical cyclone to strike a United States state or territory in the past 10 years, which is as many top-end landfalls in a decade as the country used to see in a generation. Then Bobby came through the same region in July, twice within a few months. For a place that has been hit and buried in cleanup, the news that this monster is curving away is the best thing anyone there could hear. That's the honest version, and it's good news that no dramatic headline is going to bother shouting at you. I'd rather tell you the storm is missing than scare you with one that isn't coming. Clear of the islands does not mean harmless to them, though, and this is the catch. Even from hundreds of miles away, a storm this size hurls its energy across the ocean as swell, long, low waves that travel far beyond the storm itself. Guam and the Marianas are looking at a long-period northeast swell arriving over the weekend and building surf to somewhere around 10 to 13 feet along north and east-facing shores. That's a wall of water taller than a one-story house crashing onto the reefs, and it comes from a storm that never appears on the horizon. It means dangerous rip currents, pounded coastlines, boats staying in the harbor, and a hard no on getting anywhere near the water. If you know anyone on Guam or Saipan, that's the message to pass along this weekend. The storm misses, the sea does not. Out over open water, far from anyone, Dolphin is doing what a Category 5 does when it has room to spin unopposed. It's kicking up significant wave heights around 45 feet at its core, walls of water as tall as a 4-story building marching across the empty Pacific, and its reach is staggering. Forecasters in Vietnam, more than 3,700 miles away on the far side of the ocean, are already warning that Dolphin will churn up their seas next week without the storm ever entering their waters. One system felt an entire ocean away. There's even an after effect the storm leaves behind. As Dolphin pulls all that heat out of the sea and throws it into the sky, it leaves a cold wake in the water beneath it, a trail of chilled ocean where the warm fuel has been spent. The storm doesn't just feed on the ocean, it reshapes it. Quick question while we're here, and I do read the comments on these. If you've ever ridden out a typhoon on Guam or Saipan, or lived through a hurricane on the mainland, tell me where you were and the one detail that never left you. The people planning for the next storm learn more from those stories than from any forecast graphic, and I want them sitting right under this video. Now, the honest limits of what anyone can promise you about the days ahead, because past about 3 days, a forecast turns into a spread of possibilities, not a single confident line, and you should never let anyone sell you the spread as a certainty. For the next couple of days, the track is fairly solid. Dolphin keeps moving west-northwest, stays a powerful super typhoon over that warm water, and threads through open ocean. After that, the models begin to fan out. By early next week, the sparsely populated Ogasawara Islands, a remote chain belonging to Japan, could feel a strong typhoon as Dolphin passes near the southern end of that chain, probably step down to around Category 3 strength by then. Even at that point, it would sit more than 600 miles south of Tokyo, so mainland Japan is not in the crosshairs. Beyond that, the longer-range guidance, including one of the best track models available, developed by Google DeepMind, nudges Dolphin along a generally westward path through next week, weakening as it goes, and pointing eventually toward the Ryukyu Islands and then the East China Sea. Some of those model runs bring it near the Fujian and Zhejiang coast of China roughly 10 days from now. There's even a slim chance it clips the far northeastern edge of the Philippine forecast area on its way. But I want you to hold every bit of that loosely. A 10-day track forecast is a best estimate, not a promise, and I won't dress it up as one. What I can tell you firmly is what is not going to happen. Dolphin is not going to strike the United States mainland. Storms in the western Pacific do not cross the ocean and slam into California. The geography and the steering winds simply do not work that way, no matter what a scary thumbnail somewhere tries to imply by putting the word California next to a Pacific storm. Keep that in your back pocket, because you'll see the claim, and it's false. The real land questions with Dolphin are Japan's outer islands early next week and, much further out and far less certain, China, not your coast. So what do you take from all of this, sitting where you are? If you're on Guam, Saipan, or Tinian, the takeaway is specific and it is not panic. The eye misses you. The surf does not, so stay out of the water this weekend and keep an eye on the marine warnings. If you're anywhere else in the United States, the lesson is bigger than a single storm. This is a season where the ocean is stacked with heat, where El Nino has shoved warm water into places it doesn't usually reach, and where storms are hitting top-end strength earlier, farther east, and more often than the record books were built to expect. The Marianas have taken 2 brutal blows already this year, and dodged a third only because Dolphin happened to curve away at the right moment. That kind of luck is not a plan. Meanwhile, the Atlantic has stayed strangely quiet, pinned down by the very same El Nino that's supercharging the Pacific, which is its own reminder that these patterns give with one hand and take with the other. The Pacific is running wide open right now, and the machinery feeding it is not shutting off anytime soon. Let me also head off the version of this story that's going to fill certain corners of the internet by tomorrow, because you deserve the calibrated truth, not the cartoon. You'll see people take Dolphin's record and Genevieve's record and this season's pace and spin it into the planet is ending this week. That's not what the data says, and overselling it does you no favors. No single storm, not even a record breaker, proves anything on its own. Storms have always broken records here and there. What's worth paying attention to isn't Dolphin by itself, it's the stacking. It's 4 super typhoons in one basin, 2 Category 5s in one July, a 5th Category 5 somewhere on Earth already, and a season running ahead of the all-time record year, all sitting on top of an ocean measurably warmer than its own long-term average. That pattern is real, and it's measurable, and you don't need to exaggerate it to be concerned by it. The honest version is unsettling enough on its own without anyone reaching for the apocalypse. And here's the practical piece. The reason any of this should matter to you beyond the spectacle. Storms that intensify this fast, this far from land, are exactly the storms that catch people off guard when they finally do curve toward a coast. Dolphin missed the populated islands by luck of the steering winds, not by any weakness of its own. The lesson every coastal community can take from a season like this one is that the window between a harmless-looking swirl and a full-blown monster is shrinking, because the fuel in the water is richer than it used to be. If you live anywhere a tropical system can reach, whether that's the Gulf Coast, the Carolinas, Hawaii, or the Pacific Territories, the takeaway isn't fear. It's a plan that doesn't depend on having days of warning you might not get. Here's what I'm watching over the next few days, and here's why the bell genuinely matters if you want to follow it with me. First, whether Dolphin reaches that 180-mile-an-hour peak by Friday night or blows straight past it into even rarer territory. Second, the weekend surf hammering Guam and the Marianas, and whether those swells run higher than forecast. Third, that close pass by Wake Island, and how one of America's loneliest airfields rides it out. And then the long game, the westward march toward Japan's outer islands early next week, and the wide-open question of China 10 days from now. Every one of those is a real, dated milestone, not a maybe. And I'll break each one down the moment it happens. Subscribe and hit the bell so the next update reaches you as soon as the storm moves, because with this much heat still sitting in that ocean, Dolphin is almost certainly not the last monster the Pacific builds this summer. It might not even be the last one this month.